If you do a little bit of mental fishing, as in cast your mind back, it's a good start to a video, you'll recall that we put out a list about 10 video games toned down for Western audiences. We alluded in that video to the fact that censorship doesn't always run in the same direction, and Eastern releases of Western video games are often tampered with just as much as Western releases of Eastern games. We get it, localizing a game for any new market is a difficult task, especially when topics such as sex, violence, and religion are dealt with very differently in different countries. Something that may seem innocuous to us can actually be very offensive to another culture, and vice versa. Additionally, the Japanese video game censorship board, CERO, or the Computer Entertainment Rating Organization if you want to get non-acronym about this, has become much more strict with what it does and does not allow. All of this has resulted in many alterations to games we thought we knew quite well. We've dug up 10 popular Western titles then that you're probably already familiar with, so that you can see firsthand just how significant the differences can be in the East. So join me as we dive back into the murky world of video game localization and see how games were altered for their journey between hemispheres. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are 10 video games toned down for Eastern audiences. Number 10. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Fantasy RPG and hunky boy simulator The Witcher 3 is widely regarded as one of the best video games ever made. Combine that with the hugely popular TV show and the books that started it all, and you have a formula that it does not seem smart to mess with. But that's exactly what happened when the game arrived in the Middle East, where it was promptly censored for its gore and, I believe this is the correct term, hot times. In Western releases of the game, Ciri comes across a dismembered body with its entrails hanging out. However, in the censored versions, the entrails are missing? Does this mean whatever killed this man stole the entrails? That seems worse than the original, in a way. Or maybe he just never had them in the first place. Is that even possible? And when it comes to hot times, that is the official term, remember, the Eastern versions of the game removed all instances of nudity entirely, which must have been a task and a half because there is a lot of it in this game. It's not hugely surprising that any given nation would want to cut this stuff from The Witcher 3, but it definitely changes the game's image, and quite drastically so. Number 9. Football Manager 2005. This entry is very much the odd one out, because this game wasn't censored for anything to do with violence or nudity. I know you all wanted to see Arsene Wenger naked, but you'll just have to get over it, I'm afraid. I'm as upset as you are. The reason why a seemingly innocent football simulator got censored in the East was nothing to do with nether regions, and more to do with disputed regions. Do you see what we did there? You might not see what we did there, because we've not actually told you what we're referring to, but you'll laugh in a minute, believe me. The Western version of the game recognised Tibet and Taiwan as autonomous countries. This seriously upset China, which views those two areas as part of its country. The nation originally banned the game, stating that this decision was, quote, harmful to China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Publisher Sega issued its own statement claiming it had made a Chinese version of the game without Tibet or Taiwan, and they said the versions that featured them as independent must be illegal Western imports. Now, as ludicrous as it is to think that Football Manager could ever be, quote, harmful to China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, this is still a very sensitive topic, and one that we're not nearly qualified enough to talk about in any great detail. However, what we can say is this was a pretty serious incident at the time, and we thought it was worth including in this list. But now, if you don't mind, I'll just go back to thinking about Arsene Wenger again. Yeah, that's better. Number 8. Homefront. North Korea can often seem like a fictional place with its giant rabbits and a leader who's best pals with a basketball star. But whilst the country itself does exist, one fictional representation of it landed a game in some big trouble. Homefront is a 2011 first-person shooter set in a world where North Korea invaded the United States. Developer Chaos Studios was clearly trying to capitalize on the fear of North Korea that was running wild in the Western world at that time. However, rather unshockingly, this backfired massively. In Japan, a country whose relations with North Korea are famously frosty, all references to the communist nation were removed. Instead of North Korea, the game's aggressor was only referred to as a certain country to the north. Is this still Homefront, or is it Game of Thrones? Regardless of their history with North Korea though, Japan would never have allowed Homefront to have been published in its original form, as the CERO expressly forbids anything that casts real-life nations or people as antagonists in video games. To be honest though, this does seem quite sensible. It's probably best not to tick off a real-life country run by someone developing real-life nuclear weapons, so yeah, worth playing things a little bit safe in this department. Number 7. Until Dawn. Interactive horror title Until Dawn took huge inspiration from classic slasher horror movies, so isn't that surprising that the game is pretty gory. In one particularly gruesome scene, a character is done away with by being chained to a wall and then cut in half by a circular saw. Love it. Whilst Western players witnessed this whole grisly affair, warts, intestines and all, players in Japan got a much tamer version, and by tamer we mean it was removed entirely. Just before the saw does its horrible business, the Japanese version of Until Dawn cuts away to a black screen. No editing around it, no cleverly inserted B-roll, the scene is just taken out entirely. Where do these game designers come up with these radical ideas? Going by the nature of this scene, it isn't surprising that it got censored, but surely there had to be a more creative way of doing it. Just use a different camera angle or splice in some footage of a crying panda, maybe. Anything would be better than literally nothing. Number 6. The Last of Us. It's hard not to include some blood when you're making a game about killer mushrooms, so it's hardly surprising to see Naughty Dog's post-apocalyptic masterpiece crop up on this list. As you may have guessed it, it was the violence in The Last of Us that caught the attention of those pesky killjoys at the CERO. The Japanese version of the game removes some of the more graphic scenes, for example cutting to an alternate camera angle to avoid showing a man slicing up a corpse. See, Until Dawn, this is what you could have done! It also prohibits players from being able to decapitate their enemies, although it does still let you hack at their necks with a machete. I personally don't see why this is more acceptable. The head doesn't come off, no, but is chopping away at someone's neck without their head coming off a preferable alternative? Ultimately though, the Japanese players didn't seem to mind the censoring, as The Last of Us topped sales charts in the country. I highly doubt that retaining the gore would have affected sales all that badly, but I'm not the one who makes those decisions, you know? I just criticize them later on YouTube. Number 5. World of Warcraft. One of the most notorious Chinese censorships of a video game takes place in the classic MMORPG World of Warcraft. For whatever reason, the Chinese authorities took issue with one particular element of the game. Bones. Yes, bones. The white things are completely banned in the game, with multiple aesthetic changes being made to hide them. Characters with exposed bones have their models altered, piles of bones are replaced with sandbags or ice, and in some bizarre cases, skeletons are replaced with scarecrows. Between this and the entrail-free man of The Witcher 3, I'm beginning to seriously question how the human body functions in the East. Several theories have circulated as to why this seemingly minor change came to be. Some say it's because Chinese law bans showing anything referring to superstition, while some posit that Chinese censorship rules are so loose that publishers are strict with their own games just to play it safe. Whatever the underlying logic, now you know that the reason there are no bones in the Chinese version of World of Warcraft is censorship. Why you needed to know why there are no bones in the Chinese version of World of Warcraft in the first place, I'm not entirely sure, unless maybe you're a Chinese dog. Do we have any Chinese dogs watching? Comment below if you are one. I want to pet you. Number 4. Grand Theft Auto 5. Considering the fact that the GTA series as a whole seems to exist purely to give parents heart attacks every time they see it on the news, it should come as no surprise that the series has received some heavy censoring outside of the US. The butchering is most obvious in the Japanese version of 2013's GTA 5, which was so heavily modified that it wouldn't even recognise itself in the mirror. The changes are evident right from the very start, during the scene in which Trevor drops his trousers and reveals his Wilson to the world. In the Japanese version, Trevor's, partner in crime is thoroughly covered up. Actually, I think this may have been a good choice. That scene still haunts me. Elsewhere in the game, various scenes of a sexual nature are altered, and the infamous torture scene is drastically changed with all of the gameplay removed. As with The Witcher, Grand Theft Auto is a series that is defined by its adult themes. Whilst toning them down is definitely the right call to get it past the censors, it does strip a little bit of the game's soul away. Actually, I shouldn't have just said strip. Now, I can't stop thinking about Trevor's Wilson, and this video is going to get censored in Japan. Oh no. Number 3. Fallout 3. We are heading back to Japan once again now, but before you start shaking your fists at the CERO, there is a very legitimate reason behind these particular changes. Fallout is a series set in the aftermath of a nuclear war, and no country on Earth has more of a history with atomic weapons than the land of the rising sun. As a result, several parts of the highly acclaimed Fallout 3 had to be changed so as not to stir up traumatic memories for the Japanese fans. For example, in the Western version of the side quest The Power of Atom, players have the opportunity to detonate a nuclear bomb in the middle of a town. In Japan, this option is removed, and the character of Mr. Burke, who gives you the detonator, is also removed from the game entirely. Fallout 3's Western release also features a mini nuke launcher called the Fat Man. In the Japanese edition, this weapon is renamed the Nuker Launcher, as Fat Man was the nickname given to the real-life atomic bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki during World War II. Normally, we like to make fun of video game censorship on this channel, but when it comes to national tragedies that are still within living memory, I think we can agree that this one was done for a good reason. Number 2. Crash Bandicoot 2: Cortex Strikes Back. This censorship has nothing to do with anti-TNT laws in China or due to Wumpa fruit being a symbol of the occult in Vietnam or any such thing. Instead, it's for something that on the surface seems quite tame. In the Sienna Marsupial's second outing, a death animation was included that left Crash as just a squished head and some shoes. At first glance, this is simple cartoony violence, no more graphic than an episode of the Looney Tunes, for example. In reality, though, it has some unintentionally sinister connotations. A few months before the game's release, Japan was gripped by a spree of murders in the city of Kobe. The killer's MO was to, and this is going to get a bit grim, so please skip ahead a few seconds if you don't want the details, remove the head of his victims and leave it with their shoes. The similarities between those real-life crimes and the aforementioned death animation were considered too strong, and it was altered in the game's Japanese edition so that Crash was instead left completely flat. So there you have it, a link between a Japanese serial killer and the second Crash Bandicoot game. You didn't ask for it, you probably don't want it, but you've got it. That could be our channel slogan, actually. Yeah, someone get that printed onto a sign. And number 1, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Is it even possible to do a list about video game censorship without talking about the No Russian level from Modern Warfare 2? Well, it seems not, because here we are again. The level in question is infamous for having players take part in an airport shooting to gain the trust of a Russian terrorist. It was lambasted on release for allowing players to carry out a massacre of civilians, and it remains one of the most controversial video game levels ever. Obviously, all of its detractors failed to mention the fact that you could skip No Russian without it affecting the rest of the game, but hey, why let the facts get in the way of a good story, eh? Despite the option to skip, though, several countries took extra steps to minimize the horrors of this level when the game first dropped, including, well, Russia, where the mission was cut entirely. In Japan, players could still play No Russian, but if they shot any civilians during the attack, they automatically failed the level. The history of No Russian is a long and difficult one, with its Eastern censorship being just a small part of its story. We could probably do an entire list based on facts about that mission alone one day. But then again, we'd have to be careful not to get our own video taken off YouTube. Coming soon, 10 TripleJump videos banned from the internet. Yeah, that one will do big numbers.